The most important thing that we want to say to you is it is necessary for you to relax wherever you are and stop condemning yourself from wherever you are. Perhaps the most detrimental emotion of all is that one of regret, because it's trying to do something in a time other than now, when now is the only place that you have any power. And so we want to soothe that by saying that from our perspective, you're doing just fine. And it's nice that even now you are clarifying some desires, and you can always come into alignment no matter how long you think that you've been out of alignment. You said something very telling early on that we think is at the heart of some of your confusion around this. You said something like, it seemed to me that I wasn't receiving any outside guidance, that it was more a natural or internal orientation. In other words, you don't remember being programmed against sexuality.
No.
You don't remember anyone giving you any conversations about that. It seemed that it was sort of a natural impulse. But we want to say to you that if that were yours and everyone else's natural impulses, the human race would be in great trouble.
Yeah.
Because that isn't the natural impulse. And we're not even concerned about sexual orientation. We're just saying that sexual impulses are innate. They are natural, just like alignment with Source is natural. But sometimes when you get crossways of alignment with Source, it sort of falls in the category of when you really, really want something and you really, really can't figure out how to get it, then thinking about it is almost torturous. And so the more you want something that you can't figure out how to get, the longer you beat the drum of not having it, which makes law of attraction then give you more of the absence of what you are wanting. And so things like that begin to feel like they take on a life of their own. In fact, that's where humans get the idea about there being a source of evil or a source of sickness or a source of anything, is because enough people give attention to the absence of what they want that it feels like there are literal rivers or currents or streams that are flowing that feel bigger to you than you are. Now, we liked the poignancy of your question when you say, well, anyway, how can I get from where I am to where I'm wanting to be? And we think that much that you've, as you said, that you've heard here already today is helpful in a number of ways, in part because it helps you to relax your contempt for yourself a little bit. We can feel that in a rather strong way. And also, you're, like many people, beginning to feel more hopeful that you can get to where you're wanting to be from where you are. But what is at the heart of your confusion is the same thing that is at the heart of a lot of confusion in a lot of people. It is that you did not remember and were not guided early on in your experience to give much credence to your own emotions. In fact, we would say that rather early on in your experience, there were others who were a lot more interested in you satisfying what made them feel good than in satisfying what made you feel good. So much so, in fact, that you came to a very early conscious conclusion that you just couldn't be right about the things that mattered to you. There were so many things that you felt inclined to go this way that you were forced to go that way. That at an early age, you made a conscious decision that if it felt good, it was wrong. And if it felt wrong, it was probably right. At an early age, you just were convinced that you weren't smart enough to know and that somebody else should make the decisions. And you say you weren't coached, but you could not live in this culture during the times of your life without getting a huge amount of information relative to that. Just the way people roll their eyes and different things that they say. The hypocrisy around the subject of sexuality is huge.
Well, I'd like to say one thing in appreciation to you, and that is I've listened to some of your tapes, and the ones on mating, that was very good. But there was another tape from another session somewhere, and there was a young woman there that was looking for a partner, and you coached her along and helped her to express what she wanted in a mate in a relationship. And when she said, I would like intimacy, and you rephrased that, you responded to her, you mean you really like the deliciousness of the physical experience. Well, that made me gulp. And at the same time, I thought it was such a beautiful expression. And because it sort of, for me, kind of put a blessing on the physical experience.
Well, you are such blessed beings. You are so deserving. We would like to stroke you and soothe you and comfort you and love you. We would like you to do that for yourself. In other words, we want you to feel your deservability to be loved. And we think that directly tied to this sexuality or sensuality is this feeling of, am I deserving? And am I appropriate? And am I loved? And do I deserve love? And you can feel that that's all tied together. It sounds like you're talking about the subject of sexuality, but what you're really talking about is the subject of loving, the subject of being loved, the subject of sharing love, the subject of deserving love, the subject of allowing love. And it is interesting how in this sexual interchange, which has the potential of expressing the most supreme exchanging of love, it has become so convoluted and distorted by those who seek to control the nature of society. Yes. We don't think you're as far out of sync on this subject as you do. And we think that it is a subject that you've been worrying about for quite a while, but in your coming every day into greater alignment with who you are, you're soothing all aspects of your life, including that one.
Okay. I feel that. It's the thought about the anger, when we talked about it today, that I would like to just see that sort of move away. Cause
it will now that you know about it, and now that you
I know, always known about it, but it's just how I express it, and what was the cause of it I could have had a hard time putting my finger on it.
Well, now you understand that what is at the cause of it is a self-survival instinct to find relief in the anger from the disempowerment that you felt before. And now you know that when you're in the middle of the anger, you have some means of control. And then you can say to yourself, in the same way that I am now consciously choosing the anger, I can consciously choose something that gives me relief even from the anger. In other words, so many people, we're not kidding, they go from powerlessness to anger, to powerlessness to anger, to powerlessness to anger. And part of the reason, in fact, a big factor, is that people who are watching you really prefer you in your powerless, depressed state than in your anger. Because when you're angry, you're usually fussing at them, and when you're depressed, you go off and leave them alone. So almost anybody that's encouraging you, from teachers to parents to authority figures to religionists, in other words, almost anybody is saying to you, you should not be angry. And what we're saying is, anger sometimes is a good choice. You're just not wanting to get stuck there. And when you're choosing anger, when it is a choice, now you're back in your power, and now you can choose something else. But when you just find yourself feeling angry, and then you find yourself feeling depressed, or you find yourself feeling powerless, or you find yourself feeling regret, and you don't realize that these are emotions that are coming in response to thoughts which you do have control of choosing, there is not anything that anybody wants that is for any other reason that they think they would feel better in the having of it. Everything that you want, whether it's a material object or a relationship or a state of being or a circumstance or a vacation or a pot of money, anything that you want is because you think in the having of it you would feel better. And so you have this innate, intuitive, most natural barometer inside of you that is always helping you reach for an improved feeling, because feeling good is what is most natural to you. So when you show yourself that you can consciously choose a thought that might not be the best thought you've ever thought, and it certainly might not be the best thought that anybody has ever thought, but it is an improved thought from where you were, now you are in charge of your life. It's sort of like on any journey that you take. There are so many unknowns out there, and you don't try to figure out everywhere you're ever going to go. You just look ahead of you and try to make the best decision where you are. In other words, you change lanes appropriately. You get on the road appropriately, and you make this turn appropriately. And sometimes you speed up and sometimes you slow down. In other words, you can't figure that all out in advance, nor would you want to. You're wanting to live your life right now with everything that is around you. So you just do the best you can do to keep yourself on the road, so to speak. And on the road is in that place that feels reasonably comfortable. And the more you are thinking and feeling, the more you are feeling your way to your thoughts rather than thinking thoughts and then have an emotional response to them. That was good. Did you hear it? When you decide how you want to feel, and that's what this game is about. Well, here I am in anger, and now I'm reaching for frustration. Frustration. I would so much rather feel frustration than this anger. What can I feel frustration about? When you try to guide your thoughts by reaching for the emotion first, it is so much easier to get there than if you say, what of all of the millions of thoughts that I might think would be a better thought from where I am? You see, it's sort of like adjusting your tuner rather than trying to consider everything all at once. Good.
Good. There's a little exercise that you gave in here related to that, and I've been doing it and I enjoy it very much. This is one part of it that I would like you to clarify, and it's that exercise where you say, we'll take a piece of paper and write down for 1 minute how I'd like to feel, another few minutes of what I'd like to have, and then the last few minutes on what I want, what I'm going to do today. And that's the part I don't understand what was meant by that, what I'm going to do today, probably to tie into those feelings. So I try to do the exercise, but I think the only thing I come up with is, well, I'm going to try to hold myself aware of my feelings.
Well, the reason that we were taking it further is when you decide how you want to feel, and then you try to think thoughts that you think would feel like that. Often, once you achieve that, then ideas of what you might do that might feel like that will come about too. In other words, they all dovetail together. First there is the thought, and then there is the word, and then there is the action. That's the most comfortable unfolding. So once you beat the drum of something in thought, enough that it stirs an emotion within you, now all kinds of thoughts are going to come that follow that, which means it's going to become easier and easier for you to speak about it. And once you're speaking about it pretty regularly, then there's enough vibration around it that circumstances and events are happening around you, and now your action is being affected. So that was just the gentle progress. But today, we are not encouraging action before the vibration. In other words, we are really proponents of taking action from an inspired stance rather than from a motivated stance. And the reason that we wrote that in the way that we did is because there are so many people that say, well, I'll do this action, and if I do this action, then it will affect this feeling. And we say, what happens if you're doing an action from a vibrational vantage point that's not where you want it to be, then law of attraction just brings you more around that, so your life just gets more complicated rather than less complicated. Things get worse rather than better. It's better to create from the inside out, which means adjust the feeling, which means find the thought that feels differently, and then, by your own words, focus upon that thought until it becomes more. And as you shore up that vibration so that it becomes a stronger point of your vibrational point of attraction, then all things that come to you come in response to this newfound vibration.
That it's behaviors. Is that what you're referring to?
Action will follow.
Okay.
And you make a good point, because most people, and it's the way most of you have been trained, you're taught to do this and not to do this. There is very little regard given to the way you feel. In other words, the commandments are talking about what you should do and what you should not do, mostly about what you should not do. We're not very happy with the commandments that you fashioned. We would not take credit for those if we were studying it. Where what you're really wanting to do is to find the vibration by reaching for the feeling. When you think about it, the communication between who you are and you, in other words, your source energy communication, is coming in waves of feelings. In other words, love is that connection, and that feeling of eagerness is that connection, and that feeling of clarity is that connection. In other words, your greatest conscious awareness of your connection with your source are those positive emotions that flow through you. So if you are reaching for thoughts that you can focus upon that produce those emotions, then a synergism begins to happen where the more you reach for it, the more you find it, the more you find it, the easier it is to reach for it, the more you reach for it, the more you find it, until in time you're just this loved, adoring others and adoring self being who is just bipping along, having a wonderful time, not making a big deal over petty little things that somebody else has decided to make issues of in order to try to control you.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Good, I get it. Thank you, Abraham.